Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In this Voicer interview, we invited a special guest to our podcast who has played and competed in many FPS games, Sneak Attack. He is currently competing in PUBG and answers some of our questions on his opinions about general player experiences, core gameplay, and the rise and falls of PUBG over the history of this game.
Hello, Sneak Attack. Welcome to the Ready Player Rewind podcast, and thanks for being here today to talk about PUBG. If you don't mind, can you start with a brief introduction about yourself and how you got into PUBG and FPS in general?
Sure, yeah. I appreciate y'all having me and thanks for reaching out. A brief history of my competitive experience. I would say I first started obviously with Minecraft and playing factions, hardcore factions, soup and pop PvP, and obviously the more competitive side of Minecraft with like hardcore factions, HGF. So that's where I kind of started with computer games. I was a big console gamer growing up, and I played a lot of sports games. I wasn't too invested in the Call of Duty or Battlefield or any of those games, but I definitely was a sports game enjoyer on console. And like I said, yeah, I pretty much played Minecraft as like my first PC game, and shortly after that, I got into Counter Strike Global Offensive or CS:GO, and I competed in that. And I got into all of the other battle royales, Fortnite, Apex, H1Z1, and I dabbled around in scrims and competed here and there in some of those titles. But I definitely had the most experience in Counter Strike with competing and attending a couple LAN events for CS on a smaller scale. And then I got into PUBG, and I played in the DreamHack Invitational in 2018 against Shroud and Doc, and that kind of was um, was the initial fuel to the fire for me with PUBG. Obviously, I wanted to compete at that time, but I was unable to, given that I was 17 and the age gate for PUBG is 18 for competing. So I was really motivated at the time, but I continued to play other games and other titles because I wasn't able to like fully commit to competing or playing in PUBG or even attempting to play in qualifiers for official tournaments. But yeah, that's kind of the little TLDR with my history of games. And then it wasn't until late 2019, early 2020, where I pretty much like fully committed to playing PUBG.
Do you personally think that there's like a lot of cheaters in PUBG?
Yes, I think there are obviously. I think that again, I'll compare it to other games. There's a lot of cheaters in like Call of Duty and Valorant and CS:GO and all the other titles, Apex. I mean, if you look at any game, I think with PUBG, they have recently gone about implementing new measures to prevent cheaters from being able to come back. And I know most recently they went public with their plans to add an additional step for SMS verification with rank. If a player is like flagged as being suspicious, they'll do an additional SMS verification where I think they'll call or text the number linked to that account, and then you'll have a period of time to reply with the code that it gives you, whether it's through SMS or over the phone. Um, because right now there's a lot of accounts that just use like random phone numbers that are not actually their own for alt accounts or whatnot. So I think they're definitely taking and implementing additional steps to prevent cheaters from just hopping on alt accounts that are not actually their numbers. So we'll see how that changes things.
Okay, let's move on to the core gameplay. And what are your some like favorite aspect of PUBG?
My favorite aspects of core gameplay. The mechanics, there's really nothing like it. It's very realistic. I mean, the movement, the gunplay, everything, you can't find it in any other game. If you look at some of the other battle royales, they're more cartoonish. Obviously, you have Fortnite. You look at the items, you look at some of the abilities in other games. I mean, even with super people that I dabbled in a little bit when they had the open beta and competed in some of those tournaments. There's the ability aspect, and there's really nothing like PUBG in terms of just the raw mechanics and gunplay and movement and everything. Like I said,
So how do you compare the difficulty to like other VR games like Fortnite or Apex?
Oh, I think it's way more difficult, just because of like the raw aspect of it. In Apex, you have abilities where you can counter things or take out an enemy with a certain ability, and you have different like champions and characters that you can play that have different like core gameplay aspects, and obviously the abilities vary. In Fortnite, the TTK, that's also a big thing. I think the time to kill in PUBG is unlike any other game. In Apex, you have like plates and whatnot, and even in COD, you have plates, I guess, armor plates. Not cartoonish and just very raw.
So PUBG is often called a dead game. What do you think the main cause of people calling it a dead game is?
I think if you look at like the player count, that obviously is like a big factor. Um, I think that you've had many like several games come out since then, like Valorant, and updates with like Apex Legends and whatnot. So, I think now there's that want for the use of abilities from a lot of players, right? They want to have, a character that has these abilities that, can counter or, you know, impact their opponent. Specifically with like Valorant, obviously you have different agents where they all have unique abilities, and they obviously impact the game in different ways, and you have different roles, and some are, it's similar with Apex Legends, right? Um, but with PUBG, it's very raw. So you need to really kind of dial in your raw mechanics, and you can't rely on these abilities to open things up for you, or, secure a win or a kill or whatnot, right? So it's pretty much all on you and your gun skill and your decision making and kind of game sense. Whereas, in other games like Apex Legends and Valorant, for example, I feel like players rely a lot on their abilities and the abilities that come with the agents and champions that they play, and they use those abilities to kind of bail them out of situations and fights. And you don't have that with PUBG, right? So it's just different.
I agree, of course. In more recent years, PUBG has started kind of changing that raw mechanics to make the game friendlier to the mass of people. Do you agree with that change?
I think that they can cater towards new players in some aspects. I think that they need to balance the changes and make sure that they're adding or changing things to affect all players at all skill levels. Obviously, I think that implementing new changes to pubs and public games is completely fine, and catering those changes towards new players. But I think that there needs to be a divide between the implementations that they make for new players, and then not letting those things cross that barrier, and impact or affect the competitive side of the game with ranked, obviously, or even esports, right? One of the biggest changes recently to esports is, they added panzers and mortars and blue zone grenades, and they have, Vikendi in now, and there's bears on that. They have the snowstorm, they have the sandstorm, they have, Tago, emergency pickups. There's a lot of things that have been added to the competitive side that I don't necessarily agree with, and I don't think a lot of professional players agree with, obviously. But some of those changes are more for the public side of things, at least the way that I see it, right? Especially with like the Panzerfaust, and items like that. Those are more for the casual side, but they have crossed that barrier, unfortunately, and that border, and they have obviously impacted the competitive side. I mean, most recently in the World Championship, which is in Bangkok, Thailand right now, Purple Mood Gaming was one up on Vikendi on on the first day of the losers bracket. And with the losers bracket, obviously at PGC right now, there's 32 teams, and they had two groups of 16. They had Group A and B, and then top eight for each of those groups went to the winners bracket, and the bottom eight went to the losers bracket. And the losers bracket was a 2-day best of 12, 6 on one day, 6 on day 1, and 6 on day 2. And the bottom 8 out of that 16 from the losers bracket were sent home already, right? So then they went down from 32 teams to 24 after the losers bracket. And Purple Mood Gaming was one up on Vikendi on day 1, and their final player was in the blue healing and trying to wrap around, and he died to a bear.
Mechanical skill is not as high in Japan as it is in most other regions, but they play
here
a
it
very
is.
smart defensive play. Like, run back to your cave.
That man came out of nowhere.
And there's nothing you can do to prepare for it either.
No.
And they ended up not qualifying to the last chance qualifier, which was the top 8 from them. They ended up taking 9th by 1 point. And who knows what would have happened if he was able to survive and continue to wrap around in the blue zone, right? I mean, obviously he was taking damage, but he really had no counter to that bear. And you know, that's one of the things where it's like a head scratcher. You know, they add this new thing with, you know, having a bear that can do lethal damage to players. And you have to use a lot of ammunition just to take the thing down, right? And there's several of them in the different caves spread across the map. So I don't know. I think for role players and public players, you know, having the bears in the game makes it more immersive, especially on Vikendi with the snow and everything. But in terms of competitive play, you know, I don't think anybody's looking for, you know, role play or immersion. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, you just want the least amount of randomness possible in these esports settings, right?
Of course, yeah. I think limiting RNG, and that's the name of the game, right? I think there's RNG in every game, but obviously teams and players will always do their best to limit RNG and mitigate that RNG from affecting their game. But with the changes that PUBG has made recently and the additions that they've made to the competitive esports side of things, I think there's even more RNG, right? So it's a little bit more difficult to limit it, but it is still possible.
Another thing people call a bad thing about PUBG is the slow-paced nature of it. Do you think that's putting people away from the game? Do you think they should change that slow-paced gameplay?
Um, it's very unique, obviously. Like I said, there's no game like it. And the games do take, you know, like 30 minutes, or more than 30 minutes, depending on if it's like a game that goes down to the phase 9 dot. And there's several players or teams still left alive. On the esports side of things, obviously, you can have games in ranked and just regular pub games, public matches end really quick. It just depends on, like, you know, how everything plays out. But you look at a game like CS:GO, which was, you know, the MR15, right? Or whatnot. And now, you know, you have MR12 with CS2. And, you know, it's different. They're trying to shorten the game, and they kind of copied Valorant in that aspect, right? And I think there's definitely something to look at with, like, the attention span of gamers today, and kind of maximizing playtime or games, right? And if you look at it, like CS2 has moved to that MR12 system even competitively, right? Not just like with the competitive side in the game, with comp matches in public or whatnot. I mean, the whole game, the esports side of it as well, has moved from that MR15. So the matches take less time. And if you think about it, players are able to probably play more games, you know, throughout the day with the MR12 and having the matches be shorter. I think that PUBG is fine where it's at right now, just because of how unique of a game it is and how the system works. It's not, you know, a traditional like tac shooter or FPS game where it's, you know, 5v5. You know, it's similar to Apex and Fortnite, where you have, you know, teams of four. Well, I mean, obviously not in Apex and Fortnite, but similar in terms of having, you know, more than just two teams competing, right? Like in PUBG, traditionally, you'll have 16 teams in a lobby, making 64 players because it's teams of 4 in PUBG, right? So you have 16 teams of 4, equating to 64 players in one game duking it out, and then the last team or player standing is victorious, comes out on top, and get the chicken dinner, right? So I think this pace of the game is fine. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a change and making it more faster pace in the near future. At least maybe starting with like public games. But I think it's just so unique, and it's worked for now. But obviously, if they were to make a change, I wouldn't be opposed to it, and it would obviously make the matches a little bit more hectic, which I think in turn would be potentially a more pleasurable viewing experience. But we'll see. I think it's okay where it's at.
And that concludes our interview with Sneak Attack. Thank you for listening.